The J.J. McCarthy conversation never ends. He is the number one story of the Minnesota Vikings offseason, even though the Minnesota Vikings re-signed Justin Jefferson to the highest contract ever for a player that is a non-quarterback.
With no regard for human life.
The Minnesota Vikings and the J.J. McCarthy storyline will be one that continues for hopefully the next 15 years because he's a franchise guy. You might wonder the hat that I'm wearing. Chuck Foreman, number 44, was in Andover, Minnesota, right next door to Coon Rapids, Minnesota, where my wife and I live with 2 children. And he was at the Walmart and he signed this hat. So I got Chuck Foreman's autograph, Chuck Foreman's hat, the Spin Doctor, met him, nice guy. He could be on the podcast relatively soon. Could be. Not a guarantee. He said he would come on. He said if I contacted his team, he would come on. So we'll see if he indeed comes on the Minnesota Tim podcast. Would be a very exciting guest if he does it. I even bought a little of his memorabilia to try to, sweeten the pot a little bit. So, the Minnesota Vikings and J.J. McCarthy. That's the take that I'm presenting today, and that's brought to you by Hokeland Farm. Contact Hokeland Farm and get the best rotationally grazed, 100% grass-fed beef. This beef is sold in quarters and halves, and they have custom sample packs so you can try before you buy. Don't get your meat from a Walmart or a Costco. Get great meat from Hokeland Farms. If you really compare the two, it's not even close. Hokeland Farms is less greasy, it's more delicious, it's less preservatives. There's no preservatives. And it's grass-fed beef. Contact Hokeland Farms at 952-491-1541. 952-491-1541 and get 20% off your first order by mentioning the Minnesota Tim podcast. Hokeland Farms. Get great beef in your freezers today. So Ben Gessling had this to say. He's a weekly guest on Paul Allen's 9 to noon show. And he had this to say last week about J.J. McCarthy, his footwork, and his reading space in defense's perspective. So, sorry, what?
Huh?
I don't know. I don't know what I just read. But this is what he had to say about it. He said, as far as J.J. McCarthy goes, I think a lot of this is still just this development phase of things. I don't think they're in any hurry to get him on the field. I think it still is this thing of let's make sure he's got everything down from a footwork perspective, from a reading space and defense's perspective, until all of that is done and ready. I think they're going to take their time with him, and he saw a lot of arm talent.
Huh?
And we saw a lot of things in the offseason that tell you, hey, this guy's got a lot of arm talent. I froze like Joe Biden there for a second. He's got a lot of potential, but he's still got some things to refine at this level. And I think there's a focus on doing that. I don't think anybody is saying, hey, we have to get him on the field by week 5 or something. It's a lot about let's make sure this thing is fully developed before we put him out there. Now, I have a few points of reaction to this statement by Star Tribune's Ben Gessling, who is a great insider for the Minnesota Vikings. Number one, he's right. The Minnesota Vikings do have time with J.J. McCarthy. He's only 21 years old. The Minnesota Vikings have Sam Darnold, who's bounced around from team to team, but hasn't really been ever in a secure situation with the best wide receiver in football like the Minnesota Vikings have. So there's potential for him to have a breakout season, which I believe that he's going to have. My second point is this. If J.J. McCarthy was ready to start for the Minnesota Vikings, they would not be in this development phase. Meaning, J.J. McCarthy is a very raw quarterback. If J.J. McCarthy was C.J. Stroud last season with the Houston Texans, do you really think the Minnesota Vikings would be playing this wait and see game? No. No, they wouldn't be. Because he would be so impressive and so standout-ish in camp, in training camp, in preseason, that they couldn't help themselves but put a J.J. McCarthy on the football field. So, in a way, one, he is right. Like I talked about, there's time. There's a wait and see. Like, you don't need to start him right away. It's not like Nick Mullins is the only starting quarterback on the roster, or Jaron Hall is the only guy on the roster, and that's who J.J. McCarthy is competing with. You got Sam Darnold, who's an experienced veteran. But the longer that you wait to start J.J. McCarthy, the longer it's going to take for him to be fully comfortable on the football field. And let me explain what I mean. There is learning that happens as the number 2 or number 3 quarterback behind the starter. Look at Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers, 2 Packers players right there that, well, one's a superstar, the other one, everybody else thinks he's on their way to be a superstar. I still have question marks about that. There's things that you learn as the number 2 guy. But J.J. McCarthy, you learn a lot more as the starting quarterback. You don't learn everything as that second or third string guy. You learn some things. But when you are flushed into the starting role, you learn a lot more. You get the feel for the game. You get the feel for how fast the defense is. You get a relationship with the wide receivers. You understand protection. And things that you can learn as the backup quarterback are how to read defenses. You can learn the speed of the game to some point, but can you really understand the full speed of the game until you're in the game? I think you got to be in the game. So my thought process goes to like the progression of J.J. McCarthy, because obviously he's very raw right now, which is why he's not the starter. He's not starting ahead of Sam Darnold. He's very raw. That's what the Minnesota Vikings are telling us. His footwork and pocket presence and his understanding of reading defenses needs work. Why? Because he didn't have to do any of it at the University of Michigan. It was a dink and dunk offense. I mean, he had a couple bombs here and there, but he wasn't asked to do anything. He was asked to hand the ball off to their star running back and allow their defense to win the national championship. So all of these things are new to him. He's got the arm talent. It seems like he's got the right mindset. He's got an amazing attitude, but he's not football ready in the NFL because he was not asked to do much. So it's going to take time with J.J. McCarthy. And fortunately, the Minnesota Vikings have a little bit of that. You don't want to waste all of these years of Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, but you also have a little time to get him ready. You also want to get him on the football field as soon as he can so he can get that full NFL experience. I like J.J. McCarthy. I don't love J.J. McCarthy because he's way more raw than I think anybody anticipated after the Minnesota Vikings drafted him, because there were draft analysts everywhere. I think Joel Klatt said it. He said, I expect J.J. McCarthy to start right away for the Minnesota Vikings. And now you look at these reports, and he wasn't the only one. And now you look at these reports, and it's not looking like he's close. Every single report that comes back from an insider says J.J. McCarthy, his footwork needs a lot of work. His reading defenses needs a lot of work. He needs time to adapt to the NFL. He throws three straight incompletions in OTA sessions when the defense isn't really playing. So those are all not major concerns. Those are not major concerns, but those are all things that he needs to work on that he wasn't quite ready for when he entered the NFL. So the takeaway is that he's way more raw than anybody, including the Minnesota Vikings organization, anticipated. Maybe not them, but maybe. All right, everyone, thank you for watching this episode. Hit that subscribe button right there, and thank you for making this podcast and this episode a part of your day.